Welcome to Voices of IFES. We're continuing our series of talk on World Assembly 2023. In this episode, we're talking about mental health. Dr. Jessie Dezutter, Associate Professor in Psychology at KU Leuven in Belgium, gives us a helpful overview of mental health. She explores the role of religion and faith in it and offers tips for taking care of it.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. It's such a privilege for me to be here with you this evening. And before we dive into the topic of mental health, I would like to briefly explain why it's such a privilege for me. I will already continue. I think the slides will come in a minute. I'm not an IFES staff worker. I'm not an IFES board member. I'm not an IFES delegate. I'm not an IFES student. But IFES played a huge role in my life. I'm from Belgium, and I'm raised in a warm and loving family, but not a Christian family. And when I was a teenager, I started to search for spiritual food, and I couldn't find it. And it was a lonely and sad time. And then I went to university. And during my first year of university, I met a fellow student, and she was a Christian. And she took me to IFES student meetings. And it was there that I met the living God. So thank you for all the work that you are doing. You are changing lives. You changed my life. And now we are going into the topic of mental health. And this evening I will discuss with you 4 different aspects. First of all, we will have a look at what mental health is. Second, we will have a look at the relationship between religion or faith and mental health. Third, we will have a look at how the wisdom of Scripture can be beneficial for your mental health. And finally, I will try to give you some suggestions how you can take care of your own mental health and that of your students. So what is mental health? When you think of mental health, most of the time we think of the absence of psychopathology, the absence of mental illness. And mental illnesses are diverse. Some are more known, for example, depression, anxiety disorders, addiction. Some are not so well known, like compulsion disorders or psychotic disorders, but all of them include severe suffering, and all of them need care and treatment. However, it's not because you disqualify for a mental illness that it means that your mental health is good. Mental health consists of another aspect, the presence of well-being, and that refers to feeling satisfied with your life, feeling happy, having the feeling that your life is meaningful, that it has a purpose. Important to keep in mind is that when we talk about psychopathology, that then the focus is on recovery of psychopathology. When we talk about well-being, then the focus is on stimulating well-being, enhancing well-being, stimulating flourishing and thriving. And second important note is when we focus on psychopathology, that is the domain of mental health professionals. We are talking about illnesses that need care and treatment, and therefore a background or knowledge of diagnosis on what the treatment can be is necessary. On the other hand, when we are talking about well-being, it's also the field of mental health professionals, but it's also the field of all of us. And I will come back to that later on. So now we have a bit of an idea of what mental health is within the domain of psychology. I would like to continue and have a look at the relationship between religion and mental health. As religious people, we often think that religion is good for our mental health. But unfortunately, in this broken world, in this world where there is sin, the relationship between religion and mental health is not so clear. I will try to give you some examples, some illustrations of the complexity of the relationship. And it's important to keep in mind when I talk about the relationship between religion and mental health, that from a psychological point of view, religion has several layers. Your religion can refer to your religious affiliation, can refer to your religious identity. It can refer to behavior like church attendance or prayer, but it also refers to aspects that are less visible. For example, your God image. How do you envision God? Is God a loving and warm person, or is he a strict and harsh judge? So all those different layers of religion are linked with mental health, with mental illness as well as with well-being. And I will show you some illustrations to make clear how complex the relationship is. Keep in mind that all the illustrations are based on scientific research. First, depressive symptoms. When we look at the relationship between depressive symptoms and religion, we see that on average, religious people suffer less from depressive symptoms. This does not mean that when you are religious that you cannot suffer from depression, not at all. It's possible, of course, but when we look at the global level, we see that most religious people suffer less from depressive symptoms. However, important to keep in mind, this research is mainly based on Western Christian countries. And when we look at studies explicitly done in countries where Christianity is a minority, we see something else. There are very few studies done in other countries, but there are some, for example, in Japan or in African countries where Christianity is a minority. And there we see that being a Christian, being in a minority, can be a very stressful event. And that is might trigger depressive symptoms. So a different story depending on the country, the context where you live. Let's have a look at anxiety. Anxiety and religion, when we look at a relationship, we often see that religious people seem to be less anxious than non-religious people. At the same time, we also see that people who are from their nature more anxious go more easily to their religion to find comfort, to find solace. Sometimes the relationship is even more complex. For example, with more complex disorders like compulsions or delusions. You can think of compulsions as something that you feel inside that you need to do, but the need is so strong that you go to the extremes. For example, you want to fast because fasting is important within your religion, but you can't stop fasting. You continue and you continue and you continue. It's not healthy anymore. It's no longer part of a healthy religion. It's going in the direction of an illness. Or, for example, a person who has delusions and who thinks that God is speaking to him or her, but it's not God that's speaking. It's the illness that is speaking, showing a very complex relationship between religion and mental illness. There are also illustrations showing that religion can absolutely be a strength. For example, in addiction. Addiction is something that we see often in our society, but less often in religious people. And, important to note, it's not that when you are religious, then you cannot suffer from an addiction, but it's less common. And the good thing is that if you suffer from religion, if you suffer from addiction as a religion person, it's very complex, you see. If you suffer from addiction as a religious person, then your religion can help you in recovering from your addiction. Something similar is visible when we look at a traumatic event. Traumatic event can be a wide range of events. For example, a natural disaster, but also a violent attack, abuse. When that happens, when a traumatic event happens, and you are a religious person, and you can use your religion as a resource immediately after the traumatic event, it can help you in protecting developing a post-traumatic stress disorder. So also here we see that religion can play a very significant role with regards to your mental health. And finally, I now discussed all different types of illnesses, but I also said mental health is not only the absence of illness, it's also the presence of well-being. And what do we see with regard to well-being? Religion is good for your well-being. Overwhelming scientific evidence religion is linked with more life satisfaction, more meaning in life, more purpose in life, more happiness, more joy. Again, average. I discussed several aspects of religion, but our faith is not only those aspects of religion. We have scripture, and scripture is packed with wisdom. And it's, as a psychologist, wonderful to see that psychological research is at the moment focusing on aspects of wisdom in the scripture and trying to investigate it. There are several aspects of wisdom in scripture. Within research, we call it virtues. Maybe the word virtues has a strange association for you, and then you can see it as strengths, as powerful ingredients. And scientific research proves more and more that those virtues are linked with a better mental health. I will focus on 3 different virtues, but there are more in scripture, of course. But I pick out those 3 because for those 3 there is very clear, again, overwhelming evidence that those virtues, those strengths that are promoted in scripture are good for your mental health. We will focus on forgiveness. Forgiveness for others, but also forgiveness for yourself. We will focus on compassion. Compassion for others, but also for yourself. And we will focus on gratitude. And for all those 3 virtues, we see that they are linked with less depression and higher well-being. And the most wonderful thing is that research also shows us that we can practice this and that we can strengthen these virtues with specific techniques or interventions. So we can train ourselves in becoming more forgiving and becoming more compassionate and becoming more grateful. And that will help our mental health. So important to keep in mind, those virtues are good for the outer world. Yes, for your relationships, for society, but they are also good for your own mental health. It helps the other and it helps yourself. It's beautiful sources of wisdom in scripture. I will give you some examples of interventions or techniques that you can use in stimulating those virtues. There are plenty of them. I will pick out some, but I will also refer to some websites where you can find material, evidence-based material, research material, techniques developed that you can use for yourself, within your team, within your community. Forgiveness. One technique that is very powerful and that is proven to be a powerful technique to improve forgiveness is writing a forgiveness letter. When you write a forgiveness letter, you write towards the person who did you wrong. You tell about the things that were hurtful. You tell about your pain, your sorrow, your anger, your hate. And you also tell that you would like to forgive, that your intention is to forgive. You write it all down, but you do not send it to your wrongdoer. You take the letter and you burn it. And it's a very strong ritual to start the forgiveness process. Compassion. A very easy technique that you can use to stimulate compassion in yourself is taking a quote from the Bible where compassion is very, very clear. Write it down on a small letter, take it with you. Read it throughout the day to be reminded that you need to be compassionate for the other, but also for yourself. Gratitude. A proven technique to stimulate feelings of gratitude is keeping a gratitude diary. In that diary, you write down for 2 weeks, every evening, 3 things that were wonderful that day, things that you are grateful for. It can be minor things, it can be small moments, it can be the sun that you loved, it can be the rain when it's needed, it can be huge things as well, but you write it down. And when you wrote down your 3 blessings, you go back to the previous days and you read the other blessings and you savor them and you feel it inside and you stimulate a grateful attitude. And all those techniques might help you in stimulating a better mental health. When you are interested in finding more material, you can go to the Greater Good Science Center. It's an academic center and they are huge expertise with regard to stimulating virtues. You can also go to the website of Pro-Positive Psychology, or for example, the Self-Compassion website, or you can find forgiveness material on the website of my colleague Everett Worthington. Our final point for this evening. What if a student comes to you with a story of suffering and pain? What if a colleague comes to you with a story of suffering and pain? What can we do? How can you take care? Well, the first thing that you can do is listen. And we often think, listen, it's so unimportant. No. Listening to a person is the most powerful ingredient of any psychotherapy, any counseling, any coaching. It's the start of healing. After you have been listening, you listen. You listen with a warm and open attitude. You do not judge. You do not start giving your opinion. You listen. Let the person tell his or her story. With all the guilt, with all the shame, with all the pain, with all the doubts. Create a safe space that the person can be who he or she is in all the suffering. And after the listening, evaluate and reflect. Is this story a story of mental illness? If yes, refer to a mental health professional. And this might be a big step for some of us, for some others. If it's a big step for the person you are talking to, maybe you can make an appointment together. Maybe you can even join for a first intake session and wait in the waiting room and pray while the other is having an intake session. If you find it difficult, maybe you can ask a pastor to go to make an appointment. Maybe you say, okay, after hearing the story of the student of my colleague, I don't think it's an illness. I think it's just a bit lower well-being. Then you can refer to the materials that I just referred to. You can give some advice on techniques that they can use, that they can easily implement in their lives. Or maybe you can do it within your team. Or maybe you can do it within the student sessions. Hand over some interesting suggestions. Practice together and try to improve the well-being. And of course, keep that open attitude so that the student of the colleague can come back to you and that you can feel whether it's indeed just lower well-being or whether it's developing into an illness and reference is necessary. My final point, I think a very important point. You are all working with students, you're all working with people. You will love other people and love working with them. But please also take care of your own mental health. When you work with others, it's important to take care of yourself first. Think of the airplane. Put on your own oxygen mask first before you try to help others. Otherwise, you will struggle both. It often reminds me of the great phrase that we can find in Luke, where it says, love your neighbor like yourself. Love your student like yourself. Take care for your student like you take care of yourself. But take care of yourself and also love yourself so that you can be an instrument to pass on God's love. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this talk. We've got a new one dropping every Wednesday, and if you're loving what you hear, show us some love by subscribing and liking the podcast. And don't forget to stay connected with us on all social media platforms, including WhatsApp at IFES World.